we'll dive in.
You ready to go?
Ready to go. Let's do this.
All
Come
right.
on.
Well, this is my friend Matt Scott. I haven't seen you in about 3 years, so it's great to see your face, dude. I wanted to talk to you today because I found your organization, and it goes pretty much along the same lines of what this project of mine is doing, except you've been at it for about 3 years now. So it's called the Let's Care organization, which has a lot of different branches to it. So would you care to elaborate on what your organization is doing for the people of the world?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So, Let's Care is my organization to really, well, it's funny because I've used different language for it, but what I've been saying most recently is that my goal with Let's Care is to shift the balance of power through storytelling and engagement. So really what Let's Care is focused on is uplifting the voices of underrepresented change makers and showcasing them as leaders and as people who can make an impact, because as I've found a lot in my work otherwise, there are a lot of people, like especially people of color, LGBT people, women who are not often seen as leaders. And so I'm just doing my part and having a great time doing it, like having conversations just like you and bonding and finding commonality with people who are really awesome, but often not always celebrated. And so it's a podcast. There's some other stuff within that, but so far, over the last 3 years, I've had 100 conversations with 100 plus change makers, which is kind of insane to think about, but I mean, 3 years is a long time, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's dope. Yeah, I really admire what you're doing with all that, because there's definitely a lot of inequality that still exists. And I think a lot of times people can sometimes think like, yeah, we've made so much progress, but it's just like we should respect the progress that we made by continuing on, and reaching for that actual equality.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in and even say that, like, I have found that I'm like a realistic optimist where
Mhm.
like I try to look at the world as best as like any human can in a way that is like just accurate or honest with myself, and kind of taking all of like the data and understanding like how are things, but also based on that and even what I've like learned just in my own life or in my free time about humans and how we work and how we think. Like, I do think that we have a lot to be hopeful about, even though so much of the narrative is about how stuff really sucks.
Yeah, that's a good mindset to have. I think I'm on the same mindset there, because it's just like I think that people are generally good and they want to do good in the world, but we have set up some systems that are not inherently good. So we need good people like you to address those systems. So, like I said, I admire what you're doing because I think that people do have the capability to make changes. It's just about dedicating yourself to them,
Mhm.
and that's what you've been doing. Um, so before we get into a little bit more about what your organization is doing, could you share with me some of your experiences during this lockdown?
Yeah. For me, the question of how are you has been so it comes up every single time you have a conversation with someone, right? Like that's the first thing that people ask, even on work calls. And something I've struggled to really do is understand fully like how I'm doing, because it's complicated. Like
Hmm.
in one sense, like we live in a world there's a lot going on and it's really difficult and could feel hopeless in a lot of ways, just with COVID and with how people have been impacted, and then also how people's like health, not just physically but like mental health has been affected.
Hmm.
And so that's really difficult, and for me it's actually been really tough to see people struggling so much because I think I internalize a lot of that. But on the flip side, like I also felt like really, well, one, in terms of like my work, I'm very fortunate to still have my job and to like have a project that's growing. My job is at a company called Second Muse, and my main project is NASA's International Space Apps Challenge, which is a global series of hackathon events. And in a couple of weeks, we're doing it virtually. So
Nice.
like that, you know, so we're still able to continue doing that and to continue to empower people to be problem solvers. But like, yeah, outside of that, I feel like really prepared in a weird way for what's happening in the
Mhm.
world, because again, mentioning 3 years being a long time, like just over 3 years ago is when my dad Moses passed away. And like that really happened almost out of nowhere. January 2017, he got sick, and didn't really know what was going on. And this is a guy who's super healthy and active and like ran his own business, a home healthcare business. And so he was taking care of a lot of people. And then, you know, just like that over time, or really quickly, he was in the hospital, he wasn't doing well. And then maybe a month later is when he passed away. And so I like, grief was such a hard thing for me to navigate. And I see so many people facing that now. And like, I'm really thankful that not only, I mean, I like don't, obviously I wish that my dad were around, but at the same time, I'm thankful that like right after he died, I joined a grief group that I was part of like weekly, and then like less frequently, like at least monthly, for about 2 years straight. And like I did that work on myself with grief, but now I see all these people going through grief right now, and I feel good, but I want to use my talents to help people who, and my experiences to help people who like haven't been through grief. And I don't just mean like people losing someone, but like losing a job or losing your social connections. You know, grief for what the future will be and what your plans were, like rescheduling weddings, for instance. And so, yeah, I'm feeling complicated.
Yeah. Well, I like how you did point out how like the question "How are you?" is kind of a formality, and I think a lot of people, since we're going through a lot of stress right now, it has different significance to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to highlight, but also, like you said, like you've taken some time to really think of like, how am I actually? So I think that's this time is giving some people that amount of space and time to actually really think about how they're doing. On the same lines of what you just touched on with your dad passing,
Yeah.
and how a lot of other people are experiencing a sudden loss of somebody that's close to them. If you wouldn't mind, do you have like, what is kind of your one takeaway of getting over grief that kind of helped with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing that?
Yeah, and I think my one takeaway is that it's not like, it's not something you get over. It's something you learn to navigate with. Like it's
Hmm.
still part of you. And you know, for a lot of people, I know losing someone like a close family member or a close friend, um, it it leads to like, over time it could get like more difficult for people. You know, I think there's a phrase that like time heals all wounds, but like when you've lost someone who's such a pivotal part of your life, like, I mean, I know for me, like looking ahead to milestones in my life, like if I have kids, if I like get married, if I have certain other things, I'll still be missing like that, you know, my dad in this case. And so I think the thing to do is to realize that grief isn't like a process that you just get over, and it's really not even like the way I look at it, and a lot of grief people look at it. It's not like a process that ends. Typically, people will talk about the stages of grief, and what I learned about was actually something called the 4 tasks of mourning. So I don't remember the 4 tasks of mourning, but basically the goal of the 4 tasks of mourning, this process, and I think I think it came from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She got name dropped a lot in my grief groups for a
Yeah.
long time, but like I think like she would talk about like you have the initial point where you're affected by your loss, like in a very acute way. So like crying and like not even being able to talk about it and that kind of thing. And then like the fourth task is more around learning to live with the memory of the person that you lost and learning to kind of carry that with you. And so similarly, I would encourage people to not look to get over their grief, but learn how to like integrate it into their life, or feel like understand how it could be part of you and impact you. So for me, with Let's Care, I mean, technically, so Let's Care is my company. Again, I spoke about that a little, but I started it as a project 180 Degrees of Impact. And I started that actually like January 1st, 2017, I launched that. So my dad was still around. I wasn't interviewing people. I was writing blogs about change makers. And then after he died, I think I was just reevaluating, like, not even what I wanted to do with the project, but just how I felt. And what ultimately happened for me, because not to pull the curtain back, but like what I know you mentioned the book by the Holocaust survivor that you were reading, and like I actually met a Holocaust survivor like almost 3 months to the day after my dad passed away. And I had a conversation with him at the Holocaust Museum here in DC, and I asked him a simple question, like, what is it, how have your experiences affected where you are today? And like, he just broke down in tears, and we had a 15 or 20-minute conversation there in the museum. Like, it was only the two of us. And that kind of, for some reason, sparked for me that I needed to go out into the world and meet people like Martin Weiss, who was that Holocaust survivor, like my dad, like these change makers who are making the world a better place. And so I mention my dad all the time. I live with grief, and I carry that with me. And I think it's like the coolest part of me, or one of the coolest part. Probably, I'd say it's the coolest part of me. Others might disagree. But yeah, grief is nothing that you have to get over, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's a really important message for people, because like when you are in that like that deep sad place, it feels like, when can I get over this? And it's just like, it's probably always going to be a part of you. I've only had one person that passed away suddenly that I was close to, and it was hard to deal with, and like I still do think about him, not every day, but pretty often. And it took a while for me to like really grasp that, like, that person's gone, like that's just it. But I think what I learned at the same time is I've eventually come to learn what you just said, is like, it is always just kind of there now. It's just something that you have to deal with. But also, like, I think that you can learn your best lessons from pain. Of like, I view pain and suffering as kind of a catalyst to like get your life moving, because like you're experiencing that discomfort. Sorry, my dog's rolling around on my bed being a weirdo. What are you doing, bud?
Hey, bud.
She's back. But I view suffering as like, that discomfort is telling you that you have potential to do something more. So I've kind of come to make peace and try to understand where suffering is coming from, because like I think it's like if there's a movie out there that just has like a protagonist with like no character development or no like pain or suffering that they go through, they're just at an emotional homeostasis the whole movie. How boring is that? Like, that's not going to be any fun at all. So like, thinking of your life as a movie, that suffering point is your catalyst to go on that like hero's journey type of thing.
Yeah, and that's I was just gonna say, because you do need to learn to. It helps you to learn to navigate with grief and navigate with that loss of that person, but also something I found in interviewing people who are making a difference, and I'm sure something that you're seeing in interviewing people too, is that a lot of people are really fueled by those negative experiences. So I feel like, especially after losing my dad, like I was really fueled by that to keep going with the project. And I never had, before 180 Degrees of Impact, before Let's Care, I never had a project that I stuck with for this long. And
Yeah.
like, it was something that I was passionate about, sure, with like the social change stuff, but more than anything, like that, you know, like I go back to when I first started 180 Degrees of Impact, and it's something that my dad knew about. And, you know, I had like my website, Let's Care, and all of that stuff. And so, like, I don't know, there's just a connection there. And like, even though he's been gone, like, I still have some of that, I still have some of that fuel in my tank, and it's
Yeah.
cool. It's cool to have that. And I don't want people to think like grief is a thing you need to deal with. It's a thing that could actually like do some powerful stuff in your life. And I've been fortunate to experience that. The downside too, but like, I've been fortunate to experience the positives, the post traumatic growth is what a lot of people call it in the
Hmm.
psychology world, I guess.
Yeah. Um, yeah, like grief is something that you don't want to experience, but at the same time, it's got a lot of great lessons. Like from me losing my friend, whenever I've kind of learned that, like whenever I do, when he pops up in my mind, I view it as a chance to like take in his memory, but also to realize that like be grateful for what I have, like because there's no guarantee. Like I would have never imagined that like he'd be gone one day. So
Yeah.
like I realized that like I have to take in what I have right now and be grateful for the life that I do have. So a little bit of gratitude practice right there. Of course, I would love for him to still be around, but like
And
he's taught me a very important life lesson. And yeah, so I think that that kind of translates to a lot of what's happening right now because a lot of people are losing loved ones that are close to them right now, and it's a tragedy for sure. But I hope that we can use that as fuel to be better people moving forward. And that's
yeah,
essentially what this project has been is like, I really don't want people to go back to a rat race, go back into jumping on, I keep using an analogy of like a treadmill that's running of like the business world and us just hopping back in it and just
right.
starting at a sprint.
Yeah.
I think that in itself would be the tragedy if we don't learn from this and if we just go back to business as usual. So along with that, I think that kind of that's a good segue of like I think that we should be making some significant changes to ourselves and to society on a larger aspect. And that's kind of what Let's Care is all about is to empower people that didn't have as much as a voice as they should. So with that, how like what are some lessons that you've been learning through that those hundreds of interviews that you've done? And how do you think that we should take those lessons that you've learned and move forward from here?
Wow, that's a great question, and I've thought about it so much, but I mean, as you can imagine, like I actually have taken the time once in a while to do the math on like how many hours of conversations and interviews it's been, and
Mm-hmm.
I know it's 50 plus hours now, but I don't know like exactly how many hours it is at this point. But it's been a lot of time and a lot of especially listening to people and hearing from them. But I think like one lesson, you know, that comes up is just that like everyone has something to offer to share. Not everyone's comfortable to do it, so there is definitely some work to help people feel comfortable and give them a space where they feel like they can open up and like fully be themselves and share who they are and why they're doing what they're doing and all of that stuff. But like everyone has something to offer, and I think if we look at the world and if we look at people like we only want to associate with a certain type of person or we only value a certain type of person, sure, that's human. That's how our society is built. Like I'm sure I felt like that a lot too, but like it's so important for us to push back against this desire to only like associate with and be with a certain type of person. So that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just that there are a lot of stories that you don't know from people. Like there are a lot of people who've been through some difficult things. Like I've talked with people who have like dealt with their diagnosis of a certain disease, like whether it's like diabetes, or cancer, or experiencing the loss of a loved one, as I mentioned. I've talked to people who've had, like, someone who had a miscarriage and shared that with me. People who've had serious mental health struggles and like have considered suicide. And like, I know it sounds really dark, like, but I think these are just things you hear when you give people the space to be comfortable and share their stories. And,
Yeah.
when they feel comfortable, they'll open up and be vulnerable. And you can really learn a lot from that, because when you look at the mainstream dialogue, there's not a ton of vulnerability. And even like the media now kind of struggles with it, where like, frankly, like, am I allowed to curse on your
Go for it.
shit sucks.
Yeah.
And like like it does, but like people feel like they need to put on a face where they're okay. They feel like they need to say that they're good when they're asked how they are. And I think if you could be the type of person who creates a space where people feel like they could like authentically be themselves, then you will be a happier person, because you'll form deeper bonds with people. But then you'll also, I mean, you'll be a happier person, but you'll also help people feel like they're seen and feel happy in their own right. So I learned a lot of things, a lot of random tips and tricks, but those two things, like that there are lots of stories. One, there are people that we don't listen to. Everyone has something to offer, and there are lots of stories that we don't hear that deserve to be heard.
Nice. Yeah. So then along with that, like there's a lot of inequality still within our society. But a lot of times it goes unnoticed, because I heard this analogy that I think conceptualizes things pretty well, of like trying to explain certain aspects of privilege to people that have certain amounts of privilege is like explaining what water is to a fish. So it's difficult to conceptualize for people. And there's of course stats out there of like, one that I've noticed like highlights inequality is that African Americans make up about 12% of the population, yet they only occupy about 3% of upper management positions. But with stats and facts like that, it can be a little bit harder for our brains to conceptualize that. And we do a lot better with normative influence rather than informational influence. So how do you have any ideas of how to help people conceptualize inequality outside of stats?
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of why, not only why I think I gravitate toward what I do with Let's Care, but also why, like, full-time, a lot of my work over the last six or 7 years or so has been focused on, like, quote unquote storytelling. Like, sure, the stats and the facts are important. I mean, facts are definitely important, but also we should realize that people's stories are also facts. Like, that's data to consider. It might not come in with a percent sign next to it and all of that stuff, but it's still relevant. And so I'm really big on kind of understanding what stories to uplift and to feature. And I've had the opportunity, fortunately, like, working in the work that I have, working on the projects that I have with like different corporations or government agencies and things like that, like, to, when I have an opportunity, give someone who's able to tell that story the chance. And like, as someone I interviewed puts it, like, share the mic. So there might be, for instance, if we think about the issue of like just inequality in the workplace for women, that could be featured in terms of statistics. I mean, a lot of the work that I have done, not full-time, but just more outside of work, has been when it comes to sexual assault and sexual violence in particular. And so you could go at people with here are the statistics. I'm going to tell you that like 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted on a college campus. But like, that's good to know, but at the same time, that's like off-putting for people's brains. And so I think when you humanize the issue, it makes it so much more salient, and you're able to get the point across in a way that people could actually relate to. Because like the cool thing about humans is that, like Lance, it's like, sure, you're a friend to someone, you know, you're a person, but at the same time you have all of these other elements that people could relate to. Like maybe they could relate to you from like the perspective of, like, I know your involvement with Active Minds, like, so maybe they could relate to that and the focus on mental health. Maybe they could relate to like you and other lands and like the like dog trainer side of things. Maybe they relate to like
I thought you
just
were talking about my dog.
your sense of, I know he's
My
gonna
dog's name is Lance for people watching online. I didn't name him that. I just adopted him and didn't change his name.
just a coincidence.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, but yeah, like, no, but that's the thing. Like people could bond when you humanize a story. People could bond with so many other parts of that story that you might not expect. But when you just share a statistic, it's like very often one-dimensional. So
Yeah.
Is Lance coming? Is it?
Yeah, he's right. You want to see him? Nancy, come on up, bud. He's like, who said my name? Who's that big boy? Thank you. Thank you for the kisses. Thanks, bud. Lay down. No? All right.
I had a feeling he was gonna pop.
Yeah. He heard his name. He knew we were talking about him. Don't worry, we weren't talking shit.
No, we definitely
Everybody
weren't.
loves you. Don't worry. So, did you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah,
answer?
I think I probably did.
This got interrupted. That was rude.
Yeah, how dare you, Lance? Too cute. But yeah, like just we have to humanize the stories and recognize that people have so many dimensions, and like sometimes we think that one thing's going to resonate with people when it might be something completely unexpected. And so I'm all about like sharing people's stories, and giving people a chance to just authentically like speak to their experiences. And usually I feel like it like supports the statistics and the data. And so it works out, and it makes informing people a lot more interesting.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's an excellent answer, an excellent approach to inequality, because we are just inherent storytellers. That's been in the human experience, in our nature for so long, of like just cave drawings and everything. And up to modern day of movies are the new storytelling experience. And even that, Hollywood's getting a little bit better about being diversified. There's still plenty of inequality within it and issues with that whole system, but we're making progress, and we can continue pushing towards that. And speaking towards making new progress, how can someone like me, that's a white, cisgendered, able-bodied, able-minded man, help advocate for people that aren't like me, and to encourage diversity? Because I view like I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, and I view like myself as like I have the responsibility with my with my privileges to give that power back to people. What would you say is the best way to do that for someone like me?
Yeah, and it's a really tough one, because
right, I know, that's why I'm asking.
I don't need to explain why it's tough. I think people like watching to this would realize that it's a tough thing to do. But one, I think I'll say it starts by asking that question, but a lot of the time I think it's helpful to also just ask yourself that question, and then work to educate yourself. Like something I hear people talk about a lot is that it shouldn't be the work of like people of color, or like just to go through some of the categories, like work of disabled people, work of others who are not represented or who are underrepresented, to educate others, because that's like more work on top of everything else. But I think it's like when you realize that you have a gap in your understanding, figuring out how you could fill that gap is is important. And so for you, like it might be going out and reaching out to interview people, like different people, or I'll say even people who aren't like you. That's something I try to do to an extent, even. And but also, yeah, it starts with just asking that question and being honest with yourself and kind of recognizing that I think it's okay that you're not all the way there yet. You know, it takes, life is a journey of a lot of growth and learning, and like it takes time to get there. But like when you start with that question, it's important. Otherwise, you know what? I mean, really, it's just like surround yourself with the people that like that you're not with. I think that's the toughest thing, because I was thinking about this the other day, where like the way that we develop friendships oftentimes is like, you know, college, for instance, or like, you know, social groups that you're part of, or like through family. And like that doesn't necessarily lend itself to being the most diverse, but I think it's good that we could find ways to supplement like our understanding of the world by like reading a book, or by going on like following different people on social media, or by like asking questions that would normally feel uncomfortable to ask, if people are okay with us asking those questions. So
Mhm.
uh, yeah, tough question, man. That's a big one. But I think like what I said maybe is like the tip of the iceberg. And um, there are lots of great people, I'll say, and a lot of great resources for like diversity and inclusion and understanding how to get better at those things. So
And also something I've been trying to do is like actually call people out when when they're being ignorant in certain ways because they think they're in a safe space to talk ignorantly.
yeah,
Um,
and I'll just add to that. Like that's how you. I think that's what really matters when it comes to being a better advocate for people,
mhm,
and people who aren't like you. But just being a better advocate in general. Like learning is great and knowing is great, and uh, you know, it's important to understand like groups and issues as much as possible. But if you're not actually putting those things into action, and if you're not speaking up, and if you're not calling people out on like, well, on their bullshit, but like on the issues that are happening, then I think there's still more work that needs to be done. And it's so difficult to call people out, and we're not always in a position like of power where we feel like we're able to do it. But like it's cool that like that you brought that up, because we need to like confront these things head on. Um, like a lot of people have tried to address racism and sexism and like all
ageism.
ableism and all the
Yeah.
things, you know, and like I think a lot of people have realized that it takes confronting it head on to actually make meaningful change, rather than like skirting around it or trying to create a space where it's like we're like a colorblind like a group, or like whatever, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is, where that's just not realistic.
Yeah, it's not. And I think it's I think the first step for me was admitting that like I did have implicit biases.
Ugh.
And that's like it's not necessarily a bad thing as long as I do address them. Because like I grew up in a pretty not diverse region of the country. And I always considered myself very like still open to everybody that I meet and everything like that. But there's still like underlying just narratives that you do form over your lifetime. And as long as you're able to recognize that and move forward, I think that's been helpful for
Yeah,
me. But it's also like, how do I share the mic to
yeah.
different people so that we can, you know, come together with diverse ideas and diverse people. What has like interviewing people taught you about just being relational to people? Because like I know a big part of it is coming up with the right questions to keep a good conversation moving forward. Have you seen that improve your social interactions in life? And like what can you share with us to help everybody improve their social interactions?
Wow, it's it's kind of funny because uh, you know, I think that it's weird that after 3 years, like there was one day, I'll give an example, back in April, where I had 4 interviews over the course of 2 days on Saturday and Sunday. And it was as part of a conference, or as part of like an online summit that was happening, that my friend Eric Dowds, who has this website called diabadass.com, was creating. And I was interviewing 4 people who had diabetes about their experience, which, like, I had so much to learn as someone who doesn't have it. But the thing that was so interesting is that, like, my first interview, I took so much time to prep, and I felt so ready, and I dove in, and it was an amazing interview. Like, Lance, just so you know, in the spoiler, I was crying. This is the first time I was crying in the interview, actually sitting like literally right here. And then the one after that, I felt a lot more scrambled, and I just, like, it was maybe an hour later or so. And, you know, and then the next day I actually adapted to make sure that I could have good, productive, positive interviews. And I did it by being more present. And so the thing that I learned is that we can have some really amazing conversations with people when we're present. But when you're not present, when you're thinking about the next question, it doesn't enable you to actually, like, go deeper and have genuine, meaningful interactions with people. And so the thing I learned is that when I'm talking with someone and when I'm interviewing them, that I really want to, like, get deeper and understand who they are and why they are what they're like. And, you know, I'll also say that in a weird way, I think that was a skill that I had. Like, going back to even college, I mentioned being involved with sexual assault awareness. And I don't know if it's like more of a personality thing or if it was something that I learned, but I really have always been just really fascinated by conversations with people and, like, the chance to go deeper with people. And, like, there's like a fun aspect to it too, but then also you can have some meaningful conversations. And I found, like, in a weird way, that through being able to have those present conversations, that I've actually had, like, some amazing conversations with some Uber drivers and some Lyft drivers, some deep conversations, or some deep conversations with, like, someone who I'll meet like, and never see again at, like, a bar or a restaurant, or, like, in a friend circle, or wherever it might be. And so I think it's just so important to realize that, like, in every conversation, it's a chance to actually go deep with people. And if we put up a wall where we're hesitant to actually, like, be vulnerable and be real with people, then we're not going to get deeper, and we'll have conversations that just feel awkward. But, like, I totally feel like an awkward conversation is a choice. And that's something I want people to know.
Yeah, I think that comes with the stigma of, like, vulnerability, where, like, I think it's present in, like, for both genders, or all genders, where it's just like, as a dude, you want to be tough and you can't, like, display your emotions. But then as a female, you don't want to, like, come off as, like, the emotional girl that's always crying or whatever. But, like, being open and being open about our emotions can lead to such stronger connections and better communication with each other. Because if I'm suppressing my emotion, then we're not actually connecting on the same wavelength if I'm not sharing what I'm thinking and feeling with you.
Yeah, and I'll also say that that's kind of why, that's one gift I feel like that grief has given me, in ways where if I just at least give myself permission to talk about grief and loss, like, it opens up the door for someone else to talk about their experience with loss or something else that's really difficult for them. And really, if there's one tip I could give to people, it's that you being vulnerable gives people the space to be vulnerable. And so if you're interviewing and want to have a space where you're having a conversation like that, then, you know, you could share something about yourself. I mean, thinking of those April interviews I was talking about, there was one interview where one of my friend Eric, who set up the interview and told me to do this interview, mentioned that the person I was interviewing like lost his dad in, I think it was May 2 years ago now, but like he hadn't talked about losing his dad in like podcasts, because he has a podcast. He hadn't talked about it on social media. And I'm sitting there again, probably in this exact position, talking with him. And I mentioned losing my dad as part of how I was asking a question. And he just opened up. And this was really the first time that he talked about like the death of his dad in a podcast or in a recorded setting. And so just remember, like, vulnerability is a powerful way to bond with people and to go deeper. And it's really empowering, actually, even though it can feel like scary and like it's a trap.
Yeah. And I think right now is a perfect opportunity for that, because we're all under some type of acute amount of stress that is probably foreign to us. Because like it's a global pandemic that none of us have experienced before. I think, yeah, this is a perfect opportunity for people to really open up and share, like getting back to our first part of our conversation, like, how are you really doing? And to like not feel any stigma behind like letting out an emotional dump of like, you know what, I've been hyper vigilant the past few days and stressed out, and I'm not sure where my business is going or whatever the case is. Yeah, that's an important part to highlight: presence and vulnerability. Especially presence just in everyday life, not just in conversation, is like the key to happiness. And that's in like most spiritual teachings of like, and it's even across like, I read somewhere that most war veterans say that they felt most alive when they were in the country that they were in a battle in, because they had to stay present. There wasn't distractions like a phone or going to the movies, but they literally had to stay present to make sure nobody was shooting at them, or whatever the case is. And that just speaks to how powerful being present is. So with that, do you have any keys to staying present or being vulnerable with people? Any little tricks, advice that you can give us?
Yeah. I mean, for staying present, it's like limiting as many distractions as possible. So like, even as an example, getting ready to record this interview, like I normally over the course of a day, I have like Slack notifications going off.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all sorts of different ping noises in the background. Apparently like my Google Calendar also makes a noise that surprises me all the time, like 10 minutes before events. So that's also going off. My phone, for everyone, I'm sure that could be a distraction, whether or not the sound's on and it just lights up. And so just shutting those things off and focusing on the moment. Like literally right now, you are in full screen mode, just focused on like, all taking over my screen right now. But I think, when you're able to focus on that, that's important. The other piece I would mention is just like recognizing when you have a million different things on your mind and taking time to breathe and just center yourself and like recognize that you're here in this moment right now. It's so tough to do that. It's so easy to get distracted, but also I think it is pretty simple to just like do everything you can to focus. If you know that you're going to get distracted by like texts, like right now my phone is on airplane mode and I'm just going to like throw my phone away now. And I didn't just throw it into like the trash or on the ground or anything. But it's like, that's one piece. And the vulnerability question though is tough. I think that's a lot of soul searching. That's a lot of getting comfortable. Again, back to just grief, because that's really where I developed like the biggest comfort with vulnerability, was that like right when I joined a grief group, I joined right after my dad passed away. And like I was in the group with, let's say maybe it was like 10 people usually who were in the group. And I found that my default feeling was to support other people, and to like be there to comfort them, but it took me a while to get to a point where I also realized like, oh yeah, this group is for me, like to be vulnerable and to like be angry and be upset and share my emotions and share the things that are hurting me. And so it's work to be vulnerable, but I don't think you need to join a grief group to do that. I especially wouldn't recommend that if you haven't lost someone. Um, yeah, and so it's important to just to do the work and to realize like what it takes to be vulnerable, and surround yourself with people who are willing to go there, and you kind of just learn from
Yeah,
learn from
with
them how
trust.
to do that. Yeah, you
Yeah.
learn how to do that, and trust too. Like be
Hmm.
with people who like validate you when you do open up to them and when you are yourself. Because I can imagine, and I'm sure there's so many different examples of people who are themselves and are vulnerable and then kind of get shot down, and that's really damaging. And so surround yourself with people who like validate that experience rather than like tear it down.
Yeah. I think it's also important that if somebody is being vulnerable with you, what I've found that is super helpful is like I ask so I can clarify, like, do you want me to
Yeah,
lend an ear or do you want advice?
that's
And
right.
like 90% of the time, it's just like, I just want you to listen to me. Because I'm like, oh, thank God, because I'm
Yeah,
I'm bad at advice. Yeah.
yeah.
So do you have any other topics that you want to talk about before I get to? I usually ask my last question is like, what do you want to see moving forward, type of thing. Is there any other things that you want to address?
No, I think I just want to learn. I don't know. I just want all of your wisdom right now. Like I feel like
Ooh.
as I wish I hope that's like
You want some? You want to
yeah, I hope that
drop
reality.
bit of wisdom is so with being present. Have you heard of these things called It's called the attention economy.
Yeah.
There's only a certain amount of attention that we can give, and that's been expanding because we're getting more and more addicted to technology. Because like when the TV first came out, they didn't think that it would succeed because they didn't think the typical American family had 30 minutes to sit down and watch a show. And now we binge watch Netflix like
Yeah.
crazy. But there's literally a job market out there, a profession of attention economists. That's their job to find out how to retain your attention. And it's kind of scary because it gets down to there's methods in it of like the same way that I train dogs of like specifically an intermittent reward schedule, which just means rewards come randomly. So like say you're scrolling through Instagram and 2 minutes into scrolling, you see a funny meme. You're like, haha, that's a
Yeah.
dopamine hit. And that just rewarded that 2 minutes of scrolling. And then say you scroll for another 30 seconds and you see an awesome, like somebody got engaged or whatever, another dopamine hit. And that's just addicting you to having a random reward. So like the best reward schedule for a dog is a random reward where you might get this ball 10 commands into this, or you might get it one command into it. And the more like when I train Lance, if I'm up to like 12 commands, he starts getting so anxious. So it's the same thing with
Yeah.
us, where if we're scrolling for 10 minutes, we are literally just in this state of mind that's just like, when's this next dopamine hit gonna happen? So the way I look at that stuff is I want to be the master of my own mind. I don't want some attention economist that has come up with some type of formula to control my mindset.
Yeah.
So whenever I do, there's definitely times that I'll sit down and I'll like play with my phone for 30 minutes. And it's sometimes hard to snap out of that. But the way I snap out of it is I'm like, don't control my mind. I'm the master of my own mind. And then it
Yeah.
helps me
Sometimes.
shake out of it a little bit because
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of insidious of like how they're trying to manipulate our attention for their profit. It's
Yeah.
an uncomfortable feeling for me. So that's the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah, sometimes you need to like whatever it takes to remind yourself of that. Like
Mhm.
that's what you need to do. But the thing that you just sparked for me, the one other, uh, it's not even a tip, but just something that I found that's helped me out so much in life has been just for me. It's been being fascinated with like human psychology and how the mind works, and but then also not just psychology. I guess like it's like psychology, sociology, like
Mhm.
I haven't like studied anthropology, but probably anthropology in a lot of ways too. And like it's the world has a lot of wild stuff going on, and I think every single day when you open up social media or like turn on the news, whatever it is, it's so easy to look and be shocked with what's happening in the world.
Mhm.
But when you take time to understand, like, especially behavioral and social psychology, like, it actually, the world isn't as jarring. Like, it makes a lot more sense. Like, the, not to go into any like specific examples, but it feels a lot better to know, like, oh yeah, like people are, doing this wild thing in the world, and the reason why they're doing it is tied in with like this psychological thing or that psychological thing. So like, I, as someone who studied marketing, I learned that side of psychology in terms of like businesses and people getting you to um, you know buy their product or to use their service. But I also learned like the behavioral side, and I can't recommend it enough because it's given me so much peace of mind a lot of the time, and also has helped me understand people a lot more than I did before I learned those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's kind of like the only reason I'm still in school is because I'm still fascinated with psychology. Of like,
Yeah.
if it was something that I was getting an education in that I wasn't fascinated with, I would be over it.
Yeah.
But it helps humanize people when you learn how people form certain biases and stuff like that. And I've definitely changed my approach in disagreements because it's just like these are mechanisms that we all have in our head that try to defend our ego, basically. And actually, yeah, I'm shooting a video of just myself next week that I've done a bunch of research on of how to have a conflict with somebody.
Nice.
Because I think a lot of us have the same goals. Like you were talking about, like if you turn on the news and stuff, it seems like we're like things are just crazy, everything's on fire, this is chaos, and everybody hates each other. That's what it kind of feels like sometimes, because there is this like divide and conquer tactic going on. But like as I do these interviews with people, I realize that there's so much better things that are happening and people are way more connected than it seems like when we do attach our minds to those types of like social media or news media or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
So I'm the freaking master of segues right now,
Go
but
for it. Yes, let's
so,
go. Come on.
so in that positive mindset, what do you think that you are learning right now that is going to change your behavior and lifestyle moving forward? And what do you think we can all collectively do or learn from this moving forward in the post-COVID era?
Hmm. The biggest thing that this current moment has given me is perspective. So I think probably like a lot of people growing up, like you have your own like I mean, I had my own anxieties and I still have anxiety and like face those things, but like I had those things and didn't really understand like that other people also face those things. And I think it's really tough, especially when you're like really young. Like if you're a teen and you're facing anxiety, for instance, like you're in your head.
Mhm.
And even with grief, just going a few years back for me when I first experienced it, it could often feel like you're so alone in what you're experiencing. And so again, there's just that loneliness aspect. I think people who are often going through things, it feels lonely. Like you might know that there are other people who are experiencing the exact same thing. And to what we were talking about earlier, the statistics might say that like every 1 in 5 people or however many people are experiencing the exact same thing, but you don't feel it. And that's one thing that I think does suck about our world. It is that like we're not always vulnerable and honest with one another about how we're feeling, even when it's not great. But the thing that I think has been a gift for me in this moment is one, like it's kind of cool, like knowing that like we're all going through something that's tough, and for some people it's better than others, but it sucks. And so like when I ask you how are you, I feel like I'm aiming to learn something, like to hear from you, really, how are you doing? And I wouldn't know that it's weird if you're just like, I'm good, I'm great, everything's perfect.
Mhm.
I wouldn't know that unless we had the current situation. And so now is this cool opportunity for people to be vulnerable with one another, Not everyone's taking it, but I hope that over time, people will take that opportunity to be vulnerable. And then also the other piece is just how beautiful it is that people are creating so much stuff out of the current moment. So we have like Let's Change the World Together out there doing big things, like reaching millions of people soon enough. And then you have
that'd be cool.
it's like, but I mean, well, actually, it's kind of I said that I said that like facetiously, but like realistically, like you're reaching people and connecting with people who then have have that ripple effect impact on people, and we keep seeing that, which I think is so cool. But yeah, it's like it's awesome to see people kind of on the same page, and I think it's a cool opportunity, and I love that people are creating something out of something so dark, and I love that people are growing right now. I think that the big way that I'm growing, though, is that I'm realizing more and more, especially now, how much we're in it together, whereas my initial orientation when I was growing up as a kid was like, oh, this sucks, like I'm in this alone, whatever, you know. So we're not alone, and that's kind of cool to know. And it's really cool even to know that like walking down the street, like the stranger you walk by is also dealing with some shit, and you knew that before, but at least now you know, like you have something pretty big in common, which isn't great, but it's powerful. And I think we're going to see a lot of resilience come out of this time. We're going to see a lot of like community, hopefully, and less individualism come out of this time. And I'm like not only hopeful, but kind of excited for how people will be changed by the current moment. And I don't know what it'll look like, but I have a feeling it will look better rather than worse.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Yeah, I think it's really important that we get to talking about like what those changes are going to be like now, because like I said earlier, my biggest fear is that we just hop right back into like business as usual. And I don't think that will happen. Like the more I talk to people about things, the more I'm realizing that people are taking this time to really reflect on themselves and how things are operating. So I'm hopeful in that sense. And also, you touched on like one of the key tenets of this project is bottom-up processing of like small little changes do start to spread out and do start to make big changes. So yeah, I want to encourage you and just everybody watching to ask these questions with each other of like, what are you learning and what would you like to see change? Because this is a significant moment in human history. Like this will be defining, I think it's like as defining as 9/11 was, with how big of a shift that we can do moving forward. And I think the biggest thing that we can take moving forward is to be more just open and supportive of each other and being, empathetic towards like right now I've definitely seen a lot of people, like for example, my professors have given us all like kind of the benefit of the doubt of like, hey, that's okay that you turned this in late and stuff like that. And I kind of want that to go in like forward, not just because I'm a procrastinator, but like we need to like be responsible and do like carry out our responsibilities, but at the same time, like I hope that when I run into something stressful that people do give me the benefit of the doubt. And it shouldn't only be in like the state of a global crisis for us to be a little bit more empathetic and forgiving to each other, and to realize that we're all in this together. That kind of ran the gambit there, but yeah, I think that you made a lot of good points there of just being together in this, and we should carry that community on into the future.
And like the one other thing I would say, because we've talked so much about the future, and then we're also two people who are like leveraging this time, especially to like build the projects we're building. And I just like also want to say it's like totally okay if anyone's watching or listening to not be doing that, or to be like super in the dumps and like depressed. And what I would say is to remember that you're not alone. Like there are people who could who are there for you, who care about you. It's so easy to forget that when you're physically not in the same space as them. But like,
Mhm.
it's really cool. Like, not everyone needs to start a podcast, trust me, or
Yeah.
not everyone needs to start a YouTube thing. Like, I think we're better off that everyone needs to do their part. And for some people, it's like interviewing people and putting that out into the world. And for others, it is something completely different. Right now, it might just mean that they need to work on themselves and use this as a time to relax and step back and gain perspective or whatever it is. But I hope that people realize that, like, it's okay if you're not being productive right now. Like, it's
Yeah.
really normal, probably.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, because I find that to be really important, of like not putting overproductivity or underproductivity guilt on people, because it's like for example, my mom has told me a few times like, wow, you've been doing a lot during this, like, and I haven't been doing anything. And I'm like, that's totally okay. You're a really busy person that is usually always experiencing an acute amount of stress. Like, if you take
Yeah.
this time to chill out and relax and take a breath, that's awesome, because like maybe you might not get this chance again for a while, type of thing. So slow down and like do whatever you find is healthy for you. For me, it's been just like I like being productive when I actually like what I'm doing. If I don't like what I'm doing, I'm gonna put it off to the last second. But for me, this experience has just been therapeutic, and I like doing it. But I highly encourage people to find whatever is healthy for them to do right now. um Go for it, dude. Sit on the couch or meditate or go on 5-hour walks with your dog or go camping, whatever the case is, whatever helps you do you.
Yeah, and just like, it's like so many different little points, but I'll just quickly say, like,
Mhm.
also realize that you're not stuck. So you might feel like you're stuck, but it's important to realize that you're not as stuck as it often might seem like you are. And there are options, there are opportunities. The world continues to change and circumstances change. And so I would say to remain hopeful that, like, things could get better if it is a really tough time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add or talk about before we wrap it up?
No, you literally asked me everything that I know and could possibly think of right now. So
What? You know way more than that, Matt Scott.
I'll take it. I'll take it. No,
um,
this is cool. Like, we dove into a lot, and
yeah.
I'm thankful for the chance to be able to, well, talk with you, number one.
Yeah, man, it's been like 3 years. This has been
Yeah,
nice.
this is cool because it's like you dive in, and not only are we, and this is kind of why I say, like, we're not as stuck as we are. Like, we definitely wouldn't be here talking right now if COVID and like quarantine weren't happening. I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have created this project, and so, I mean, it's cool to like think about, and I think important to think about what the upsides are. And I would also just say, I hope people don't feel guilty about, like, because I've experienced this a little, like, guilty about the positives and guilty when things are going right in a time where it seems
Yeah.
like everything is like burning. Like, it's okay to it's okay to not be okay, but it's also okay to be okay.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we're here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And like I said, it's wonderful to see you and catch up a little bit. Hopefully we can see each other again soon.
Yeah, come
And
on.
it doesn't take a global pandemic for us to have a nice conversation like this.
Come over. DC is waiting for you. It's still
DC's still there?
beautiful.
Okay, cool.
It's still
Yeah.
beautiful, even though it's harder to enjoy it right now. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
come, and I'll let you know if I'm out in Colorado at any point.
Yeah. I did see that you had an interview out in Denver at some
I
point. So if you're
did.
back
I
out
did.
here.
Yeah,
Let me know.
that that was like, oh man, yeah, back in 2017, I think, like
Yeah.
October 2017. Interesting, is an interesting time. Great trip to Denver though. Like,
Yeah.
I had, I have to say, like, and this is just another point for people around like making space for yourself, but that was maybe 6 or 7 months after my dad died, and I just needed to like take a break. So I took off from work. I
Mhm.
found a really cheap flight like on Frontier, one of these airlines, to Denver, and just flew out, like stayed at a cheap Airbnb, and I had an amazing time. Like, and I interviewed like someone while I was there, and I met like my Airbnb's host there. And so like make space to take care of yourself and to relax and
Mhm.
like to go hiking and do the things that make you happy. And I'm glad I did that, but I don't want people to forget that, like, sure, maybe you can't be in 6 feet within 6 feet of other people, but you could still like take care of yourself and enjoy yourself.
Sure, man. Yeah.
But don't fly and wash your hands.
Yeah. When you can fly, if you come back out to
Yeah,
Colorado, I'll give you a tour. I love being a tour guide because it's like my own mini vacation. You know,
I'll
like,
take it.
hey, I get to go on a hike now too.
I'll take it.
Um, but yeah, I appreciate you providing your unique insights on this experience and talking a little bit more about your projects with Let's Care. I'll put a link in the bio. People should definitely check it out.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of good work, and I think it's really important that like you made a lot of just purposeful changes in your life to make sure that you're making the impact that like you want to do. And a lot, I feel like it's sometimes a privilege to be able to do what you want to do, but I feel like some people just make the excuse of like, no, I've got a steady job and like this is working out okay. But I think you're a prime example of go for it. Go like chase after your dreams and create like a legacy to leave behind that you did something with your life, and that's what you're doing right now, man. I really admire it, and I am glad that I got the chance to talk to you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing. So
Cool stuff. And I
yeah,
mean, like, in like one sentence, because I'm talking so much, like
it's all good.
it's so I, it's really, for me, it's just about being happy. And like, if whatever you do, think about what you could do to make yourself happy or to put yourself in a situation where you feel better about the world around you. And I'm glad I was able to do that and find that in my way, and I'm hopeful that other people could do the same in their way.